Vienna, 1907. Just as the first bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled over the waking city, and the kitchens of Hofburg Palace filled with the scent of rising bread and boiling coffee, Geneva Harlowe stood on the cold stone floor of the scullery, her sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed from the steam and heat. She scrubbed silver with quick, practiced movements, the hem of her gray linen dress damp from spilled dishwater. A maid of no title, no dowry, and certainly no name that belonged in the red and gold salons above. She moved like someone who had known hunger and learned to outrun it. She didn't look up when the heavy door creaked behind her. "You're early," she said, still working. "Breakfast trays don't go up for another hour." "I'm not here for breakfast." The voice was deep, quiet, and unfamiliar. Geneva turned, startled. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered in a crisp military riding coat, his golden hair damp from the rain. He looked out of place here. The Spartan scullery with its cracked tiles and soot-dark ceiling didn't deserve someone like him. His gray eyes were fixed on her, not unkindly, but with the sharp curiosity of someone used to noticing what others missed. "I'm looking for the head steward," he said. "They told me he'd be below stairs." Geneva wiped her hands on her apron and pointed toward the corridor. "End of the hall, left turn, second door." "Thank you." He didn't move. "You're not Austrian." "Neither are you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "True. I'm from New York. Lieutenant Thatcher Nolan. Diplomatic cavalry." Geneva stiffened. She knew the name. There was talk among the other servants. An American officer, attached to the embassy, given temporary residence in the palace as part of some arrangement between Emperor Franz Joseph and the U.S. ambassador. A foreigner among royals, tolerated but watched. And now, apparently, wandering the servants' quarters. "You shouldn't be down here," she said, lowering her voice. "If anyone sees you, then I'll say I got lost," Thatcher answered. Which isn't entirely untrue. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, brushing rain from his gloved hands. "You're Geneva?" She blinked. "How do you know my name?" "I saw you yesterday. In the courtyard. You were carrying a tea tray through the rain. You handed it off to the Archduchess's lady-in-waiting, then slipped back inside before anyone noticed." Geneva said nothing. Thatcher looked at her the way someone might look at a coded message. "You moved like someone who didn't want to be seen. But you were watching everything." She turned back to the silver and picked up another spoon. "You're imagining things." He stepped closer. "No, I don't think I am." Geneva's hands trembled as she scrubbed. She hated that he was right, and more than that, she hated that he'd seen her. "Please go," she said. "If the steward finds you down here, I'll be punished." Thatcher didn't argue. He nodded once and stepped away. But before he left, he said, "I'm not here to cause trouble. But I think you know more about what goes on in this palace than most people upstairs. And I could use a friend with eyes like yours." She didn't answer. By the time she looked up again, he was gone. By the next week, they were meeting in the abandoned corridor behind the stables just for a moment, just to exchange quiet glances and names of those who might be plotting something behind gilded curtains. Geneva had been in the palace 3 years, long enough to know which doorways were never used and which maids carried more than linens. She shared what she could. He listened. One afternoon, he handed her a folded note tucked inside a packet of sugar. She found it hours later, hidden beneath the tray she was carrying up to the Empress's parlor. Inside, written in neat, slanted script, "The French attaché is meeting with the Crown Prince again. East Wing, tonight." You were right. She burned the note in the stove before anyone saw. That night, she met him behind the conservatory, where glass windows fogged with the warmth of lanterns and the scent of orange blossoms. He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You were right about the attaché. You shouldn't be investigating this alone," she whispered. "If they find out you're watching, they already suspect me." Geneva stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then stop. Go back to the embassy. Let someone else handle this." "I can't," Thatcher said. "Not when you're the only one telling the truth." Silence hung between them. Then, slowly, he reached for her gloved hand. His fingers brushed hers light, uncertain, and her breath caught. "I think about you," he said, barely louder than the wind. She pulled her hand away, but not before her fingers lingered just a second too long. "You shouldn't," she said, but her voice shook. He stepped back. "I know." By spring, word was spreading of unrest in the Balkans. The palace grew tenser, guards doubled, letters censored. Servants watched more closely. One morning, Geneva found a torn scrap of paper beneath the tea cart wheel. Duel at dawn. Courtyard. Don't come. She came anyway. Hidden behind a stack of firewood, she watched as Thatcher faced the French attaché's aide under the pale sky. Swords clashed. Steel rang. Blood darkened the edge of Thatcher's sleeve, but he didn't falter. When the duel ended, the aide lay on the ground, groaning, and Thatcher stood, breathless, victorious. She ran to him when the others left. Her hands pressed against his arm to stop the bleeding. "Why did you do this?" she demanded. "Because I had to protect what we found," he said. "And because he threatened you." She looked up, eyes wide. "He knew about us," Thatcher said. "He said your name." Geneva said nothing. She wrapped his arm in linen torn from her apron, fingers trembling. "I'm leaving," he said. "They're sending me back to America. Next week." Her heart dropped. "I'll refuse the order," he said quickly. "I'll find a way." "No," she said, voice breaking. "You can't. You'll be court-martialed." "I don't care." "I do." He reached for her face. She let him. His thumb brushed her cheek. Their foreheads touched. For a moment, the world held still. "Come with me," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "I can't," she said. "They'd never let a maid leave with an officer. You know that. Then I'll come back. You won't get the chance." They stood in silence, hands clasped, the sun rising behind the palace walls. 3 days later, Geneva was summoned to the Empress's private salon. She entered with her head bowed, apron spotless, eyes lowered. The Empress looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, in her quiet, clipped German, "You have served this court with discretion. That is rare." Geneva said nothing. The Empress folded her hands. "The American officer. You saved his life." Geneva's heart pounded. "You deserve better than a scullery," the Empress said. "But you will never be one of us." "Not truly." Geneva nodded. "I know." The Empress studied her. "There is a duchy in the north. The last holder died without heir. The title is vacant. It means little now, no land, no power, but it is still a title." Geneva's breath caught. "I can give you that. Quietly. On paper. You'll leave the palace. You'll go to Paris, then to London. You will wait. And then, if he returns," the Empress said, "you will meet him there. As an equal." Geneva's voice shook. "Why would you do this for me?" The Empress stood. "Because once, a long time ago, I loved someone I could not have. And I was not as brave as you." She stepped closer and took Geneva's hand. "Go. Before anyone notices." A week later, Geneva Harlowe left the Hofburg Palace with only 2 trunks and a sealed letter declaring her the Duchess of Marburg, by imperial grace. She did not cry. She would wait. She would be ready. The train to Calais churned through the gray morning like a restless thought. Geneva sat upright in the corner compartment of the second-class carriage, gloved hands folded over her lap, the stiff wool of her traveling coat pressing against her throat. Outside, the French countryside blurred into hedgerows and low stone cottages, the fields still damp with spring thaw. Her new passport lay hidden beneath the lining of her valise, bearing a name she had never spoken aloud, Duchess Geneva of Marburg. She hadn't yet decided how to say it. The stewardess had addressed her as "Milady" when she boarded in Paris. Geneva had nodded, not trusting her voice. No one else on the train knew her face, not the way the palace staff once had, by the shape of her shoulders bent over basins, by the rhythm of her steps on marble floors. Here, she was a blank page. She pressed a hand to the window pane, cool glass anchoring her as the train rattled over an iron bridge. Below, a ribbon of river wound through the hills. Somewhere beyond it, Thatcher was crossing the Atlantic. She hadn't heard from him since he left Vienna. That was the arrangement. No letters, no messengers, no trace. The Empress's caution had not been misplaced. Geneva had understood. Still, the silence had hardened into something brittle in her chest. A knock startled her. The conductor stood outside her compartment. "A telegram awaits you at the port, Duchess." She nodded. He withdrew. She exhaled slowly. The title still felt like a borrowed cloak, but she wore it better now. In London, she would arrive not as baggage but as invitation, an unmarried duchess with no debts, no scandal, and just enough mystery to stir curiosity. That was the Empress's design. She stepped off the train at the harbor and collected the telegram with trembling fingers. The seal was unfamiliar. She opened it. Thatcher Nolan disembarked Liverpool, April 12th. awaiting you at Claridge's. Her breath caught. She didn't reread it. She didn't need to. The ferry crossing to Dover was rough, the sea heaving under a low sky, but Geneva stood on deck the entire time. Her coat soaked through from the spray. Salt clung to her lashes. She kept her gaze westward. At the London terminus, she found a carriage waiting, green enamel, brass trim, a driver with no questions. When the hotel's white facade rose before her, gleaming like polished bone, she didn't hesitate. She was shown up a side staircase, not the grand one, and led to a suite on the third floor. He opened the door before she could knock. His hair was shorter, the lines around his mouth deeper, but Thatcher hadn't changed in ways that mattered. The moment their eyes met, the months collapsed. "You came," he said. "I told you I would." He stepped aside, and she entered. The room was lit by soft lamplight. A fire glowed low in the grate. Maps of the continent were spread across the writing desk, and beside them, a single white rose in a narrow vase. "I didn't know if they'd let you leave," she said, unfastening her gloves. "They didn't," he replied. "I resigned." She turned. "Your commission? Gone." He folded his arms. "I didn't want to serve anyone who expected me to forget you." The room was quiet. Geneva stepped forward, then stopped. "I'm not who I was," she said. "I don't know if I ever will be again." Thatcher reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded slip of paper. "Then it's lucky I saved this." She took it. It was the first note she had given him scrawled on a scrap of linen. The ink smeared where her finger had caught it. "You'll find them in the drawing room at dusk. Don't let them see you first. You kept this." He nodded. "It was the first time I realized you were braver than I was." She looked down at the paper, then at him. "I'm still afraid." "I don't need you unafraid," he said. "I just need you beside me." She stepped into him then, slowly, and he caught her in his arms. Not with urgency, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited without promise. Her head rested against his shoulder. She let herself breathe. "I don't want to be a duchess if it means I lose this," she whispered. "You won't." He brushed her hair back. "We'll rebuild around it." They didn't speak again for some time. Outside, the London rain began to fall, soft and steady. Later, over a supper carried up by a silent steward, Geneva unfolded the letter of patent granting her title. She passed it to Thatcher across the table. "We'll need a residence," she said. He studied the document. "We'll need allies. And a cause," she added. "Something that justifies two people with no allegiance but each other." He nodded. "Then let's give them one." She raised her glass. "To the Duchess and the man who followed her." He lifted his. "To the maid who taught me how to see." Their glasses touched. A beginning, not a conclusion. And the rain continued, quiet as a vow. Claridge's, spring deepening into early May, brought a shift in the light longer evenings that cast gold across the heavy drapes, and a kind of hush in the air, as if London itself were holding its breath. Geneva sat at the writing desk near the window, a pale blue ribbon between her fingers, threading it through the stays of a new corset. Her trunk had arrived from Vienna late the night before, and tucked into its side seam had been a note in the Empress's hand, brief and signed, and bearing only the words, "You must be seen." Carefully, she laid the ribbon aside and reached for the invitation that had come by courier that morning, its envelope cream thick and wax sealed with the crest of Lady Argmont, a name she knew only from whispered palace gossip. Franz Joseph's second cousin by marriage, widowed, and a notorious hostess in Kensington Square. "You don't have to go," Thatcher said from the other side of the room. He stood shirtless near the hearth, shaving with slow, efficient strokes, the mirror propped against the mantel catching his reflection in profile. "I do," Geneva replied, not looking up. "If I stay hidden, I'll be presumed scandalous or worse, illegitimate." He rinsed the blade in the basin. "Then let me come with you. You're not in uniform anymore. You have no station here. I have my name." She turned to face him. An unmarried American man arriving with a newly titled Duchess? They'd dismiss me before the first waltz. He set the blade down and wiped his face. "So what do you need me to be?" She rose and crossed the room. "Not a guard. Not a distraction." She paused, adjusting the collar of his shirt as he slipped it on. "I need you to be real," she said. "When they ask about me, I want them to believe I belong here. Not because I inherited a name, but because I chose my place." He studied her. "I've never been good at pretending." "Then don't," she said. "Just let them see you watching me." That evening, Geneva entered Lady Argemont's drawing-room beneath a chandelier that shimmered with bohemian crystal, her gown a muted green silk trimmed with ivory lace. She had borrowed it quietly from a couturier in Knightsbridge, promising repayment once her accounts were unfrozen by the Crown Registrar. No one noticed. Or rather, no one said they did. The room was a tide of titled women and men with signet rings and noses used only to smelling their own. Geneva did not curtsy. She inclined her head once to the hostess, who took her hand with a faintly bemused smile and said, "Ah, the one we've heard about." Geneva replied, "Only half of it is true." Lady Argemont's eyes glinted. "That is the better half, I hope." "I wouldn't know. I was too busy living it." Across the room, someone laughed behind a fan. She moved through the gathering with deliberate grace. She did not hover. She accepted a glass of wine, listened more than she spoke, and when asked about Marburg, she said only, "The duchy is quiet, but loyal." No one pressed. A duchy without land was like an estate without a gate, impressive only from a distance. Thatcher arrived an hour later, as arranged. He wore a black evening coat and stood near the pianoforte, saying little. He did not look at her until the musicians began a mazurka. Then, slowly, he crossed the floor. "May I?" he asked. She hesitated just long enough for the watching eyes to catch it. Then she placed her gloved hand in his. They danced. Not the tight, formal precision expected of court-trained partners, but a quiet, measured step that moved like breath between them. He held her properly, but his thumb brushed the inside of her wrist once deliberate and unseen. "You're trembling," he whispered. She lifted her chin. "So are you." When the music ended, he released her hand precisely as the final note faded. Later, when she returned to Claridge's, she found a small velvet box on the writing desk. Inside was a brooch, a swallow crafted in silver filigree, wings outstretched, tiny sapphires for eyes. "No note?" she asked. Thatcher shook his head. "Just a jeweler's mark. Vienna." She traced the shape. "Someone wants me remembered." Or watched. She closed the box and locked it in the drawer. The next morning brought a letter marked with the seal of the Foreign Office. Geneva broke the wax and read it, brow furrowing. "They want to meet?" Thatcher asked. "In a private room at Whitehall. With a representative from the Imperial Embassy." He frowned. "They're testing you." "I know," she said. "But I have something they want." "What's that?" She folded the letter. "The certainty that I won't use what I know." He watched her cross the room to the wardrobe. She lifted a pale gray dress from its hanger and laid it flat on the bed. "You're sure about this?" he asked. She turned. "I lived in silence for years. I won't spend the rest of my life apologizing for surviving it." He nodded. "Then I'll wait outside." "No," she said, holding his gaze. "You'll wait across the street. If they try to keep me, you'll go straight to the French legation. Not the Americans." He hesitated. "You think it could come to that?" "I don't know," she answered. "But power doesn't like what it can't control." That afternoon, she stepped through the doors of Whitehall with the swallow brooch pinned discreetly at her collarbone. She did not look back. Across the street, Thatcher stood in the shadow of a bookseller's awning, fingers curled in his coat pocket around a folded page, the last copy of the Empress's letter, worn soft with rereading. He would wait. He always had. The paneled room at Whitehall was cool and dim, its high windows veiled by heavy green drapes that dulled the spring light to a gray hush. Geneva sat at the long table of polished walnut, her back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from her, two officials conferred in hushed tones, one in a navy morning coat with a red silk cravat, the other bearing the insignia of the Austro-Hungarian Imperial Embassy, a thin man with a beard that had once been darker. Neither had introduced themselves. A decanter of water sat untouched between them. "You are aware," the bearded man began at last, "that the title bestowed upon you holds no precedent under British peerage." Geneva met his gaze. "I have no intention of seeking a seat in Parliament." The man in the cravat cleared his throat. "Your presence in London, however, is complicated." "You mean inconvenient," she said evenly. He hesitated. "There are concerns." She tilted her head. "About what?" "That a woman who once folded linen now wears satin? Or that I possess knowledge of certain correspondences that were never meant to reach Vienna's inner court?" The silence that followed was not heavy, but brittle. The bearded envoy glanced toward the door. "We understand your position, Duchess, and we recognize that the Empress acted within her rights." Then I assume this meeting is not about revoking what's already been conferred. No, the British official said. But we would prefer to avoid further disruption. Geneva uncrossed her ankles and stood. Then allow me to be clear. I did not come to London to dismantle anyone's peace. I came to live free of concealment. If you want my silence, you already have it so long as I am left in peace and my safety is not compromised. The envoy's expression didn't change. And the American? He belongs here no more than I do, she said. But we are not pawns. We made our own way. The envoy gave a shallow nod. Then let us hope it remains that way. As she stepped into the corridor, the door shut behind her with a soft click, not a slam. She didn't allow herself a breath until she reached the courtyard steps. The rain had stopped. The stones were slick beneath her boots, but the air had sweetened with distant lilac. Thatcher stood beneath the wrought iron gate beneath a plain umbrella, his coat already damp across the shoulders. His eyes scanned her face before she reached him. "You're whole," he said. "For now." He offered his arm. She took it without pause. They walked in silence until they reached the Thames embankment. The river, swollen and brown, moved with its usual indifference. Geneva watched a coal barge drift under Westminster Bridge, its cargo low in the water. "They'll keep watching," she said. "So will I." She glanced at him, uncertain whether to laugh or scold. "And what exactly are you watching for? Any sign you've grown tired of pretending you're alone in this?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the towers of Parliament. "They asked me nothing about the palace." "Not directly. They're afraid you'll say something that makes sense," he said. "They prefer their ghosts silent." She turned to face him. "I need more than half-truths. If I'm to have a place in this world, it has to be something I shape myself." "You've already begun." "No," she said. "I've only been surviving. I want to choose now." He studied her. "Then let's choose together." They walked until the lamps flickered on, one by one, casting watery golden rings across the cobblestones. At the corner of a narrow street that led toward St. James's, he paused. "I've rented a small house," he said, "not far from Hyde Park. Quiet. 2 stories. No staff." Her breath stilled. "You can come," he added. "Not as my guest. As my equal." She looked down the street, where the gaslights blurred against the gathering dusk. "I'll have no position," she said. "You'll have me. And the world will say I've abandoned propriety." He smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, only a kind of quiet faith. "Let them speak. They always do." She took his hand, gloveless now, and held it between both of hers. "I want a key," she said. His brows lifted. "Now." "No. When I've earned it." He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then I'll leave the door unlocked until you do." As they parted at the corner, she did not look back. The next morning, Geneva rose before dawn and walked to the registrar herself. The clerk, startled by her presence, took her name and motioned for her to wait while the paperwork was fetched. She stood beneath the gaslight, watching dust curl in the air. When the clerk returned, he held a small bundle of documents, tied with ribbon. "And this?" she asked, lifting the top sheet. "Declaration of residence," he said. "For a duchess without estate. You must list an address." She paused, then wrote Thatcher Street in careful, steady script. The clerk glanced at it, then stamped the page without comment. As she stepped out into the morning light, the bells of the city rang noon across the rooftops. She didn't need to look at the paper again. She had chosen, and she would not step back from it.